You're bleeding, dummy. Don't you know what that means? Are you dying? Clara looked confused, her face red with embarrassment. She didn't understand what was happening, but she could feel their mockery like a weight pressing on her chest. Daniel's heart sank when he saw it, a dark red stain on the back of Clara's dress. His fists clenched as the boys laughed harder, circling her like vultures.
Hey!
Daniel's voice thundered across the yard, startling them. He stormed over, his eyes blazing. What's wrong with you? Leave her alone. The boys sneered at him, their confidence undeterred. One of them, taller and older, smirked. What's it to you? She's your girlfriend or something. Or are you just the family dog? Shut up! Daniel growled, stepping between them and Clara. His voice shook with anger. Apologize to her.
Now.
The tall boy rolled his eyes and shoved Daniel lightly. Relax, hero. We're just having fun. But Daniel wasn't having it. His fist flew before he could think, landing squarely on the boy's jaw. The others shouted in surprise, but Daniel didn't stop. His pent-up frustration, months of unfair treatment, and anger boiled over in that single moment. The scuffle quickly turned into chaos. Daniel fought like a cornered wolf, defending Clara with everything he had. By the time a teacher rushed over to break it up, Daniel's shirt was torn, his knuckles bloody, and the other boys were a mix of angry and stunned. Clara clung to his arm, her face wet with tears. She didn't understand why they had laughed at her, but she understood one thing: Daniel had fought for her. Back home. When Victoria opened the door to find Daniel and Clara standing there, her face darkened immediately. She noticed the torn clothes, the bruises, and the dried blood on Daniel's hands. What happened now? She demanded, crossing her arms. Daniel opened his mouth to explain, but Clara cut him off, sobbing. Mom, some boys were laughing at me. They said I was bleeding. Victoria's eyes fell on the stain on Clara's dress, and her expression changed instantly. Her lips thinned as she grabbed Clara's arm and pulled her inside. Do you know what you've done? Victoria hissed at Daniel, her voice low but venomous. Getting into fights. Embarrassing me like this. How dare you? Daniel's heart sank. Mom, I was protecting her. Protecting her. Victoria's voice rose. You made it worse. You think fighting solves anything? Look at you, filthy, bleeding, like a wild animal. And now Clara is humiliated because of you. Clara looked up at her mother, confused. But, Mom, Daniel helped me. Victoria ignored her. Go upstairs, she said coldly to Clara. Change out of that dress. And hand me your underwear, too. Clara hesitated.
Why?
Victoria's gaze flicked to Daniel. Because he's going to clean it. Since he likes making a mess, he can deal with the aftermath. Daniel stared at his stepmother in disbelief. What? You heard me, Victoria snapped. Take her dirty clothes and wash them. You're the one who caused this mess. Clara handed him the bundle reluctantly, her face turning red. I don't want Daniel to. It doesn't matter what you want, Victoria interrupted sharply. Daniel owes us for all the trouble he's caused. Daniel didn't argue. He took the clothes silently and went to the sink. His hands shook as he scrubbed at the stain, the water turning pink as it ran down the drain. The humiliation burned in his chest, but he didn't let himself cry. Clara watched from the doorway, her eyes wide with guilt. Daniel, I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't mean for this to happen. It's okay, Clara, he said softly, not looking up. It's not your fault. Victoria appeared behind Clara, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Sweetheart, don't feel bad for him," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "He likes playing the hero, but look where it gets him. Always in trouble." Clara frowned.
"But he..."
"Sure," Victoria cut her off. "You'll understand when you're older. Boys like Daniel always want attention. He just wants you to think he's a good brother. But if he were really a good brother, he wouldn't have embarrassed you like that." Clara looked uncertain, her young mind trying to process her mother's words. In the days that followed, Victoria didn't let the incident fade. Every chance she got, she planted small seeds of doubt in Clara's mind. "Daniel only fought because he was angry, not because he cared about you," she said one evening while brushing Clara's hair. "He's always angry, don't you think?" Clara nodded hesitantly. "And who had to clean up after everything?" "I saw him." "He cleaned my clothes," Clara said softly. Victoria smiled faintly. "Only because I told him to. Don't let him fool you, sweetheart. He does things for himself, not for you." Daniel noticed the change in Clara almost immediately. She stopped coming to him for help with her homework. She avoided him in the hallways at school. When he tried to sit with her during dinner, she moved closer to Victoria. At first, he thought she was just embarrassed by what had happened. But over time, it became clear that something else was going on. One evening, he overheard them talking in Clara's room. "Mom says you don't really care about me," Clara said hesitantly, her voice small. "She says you just want attention." Daniel's heart broke. "That's not true," he said, stepping into the room. "Clara, I've always looked out for you." Victoria appeared behind him, her face cold and hard. "Don't eavesdrop," she snapped. "It's rude." "I wasn't eavesdropping," Daniel said, his voice tight. "I'm trying to fix this." "Fix what?" "The mess you made." Victoria scoffed. "You've done enough. Maybe it's time you stop pretending to be the hero and learn to mind your place." Clara looked between them, torn. But in her young heart, Victoria's voice carried more weight. Over the next few weeks, the gap between Daniel and Clara grew wider. No matter how hard he tried, Victoria always found a way to twist his actions against him. If he helped Clara, Victoria would call it interference. If he stayed away, Victoria would call it neglect. Clara didn't hate him, not yet. But the seeds had been planted, and Daniel could feel them growing, slowly but surely. One night, as he lay awake on his thin mattress, he stared at the ceiling and wondered how much longer he could endure it. He thought of the boys in the schoolyard, the fight, the mockery, and the punishment that followed. No matter what he did, he was always the villain in someone's story. And for the first time, Daniel wasn't sure if he could keep fighting. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, painting the streets in shades of orange and gray as Daniel trudged home from school. His backpack felt heavier than usual, not because of the books, but from the weight of the day. Victoria's constant criticisms rang in his ears. "You're useless," she'd spat that morning, piling on the chores before school. His father's usual indifference hadn't helped either. As Daniel rounded the corner near the neighborhood playground, faint voices pulled him from his thoughts. Laughter, cruel and sharp, floated through the air, followed by a sound that froze him in his tracks, Clara's small, shaky sobs. His stomach tightened as he followed the noise. "Hey, Clara," a boy sneered. "Do you even know what a pad is? Or do you just walk around bleeding everywhere like a little pig?" More laughter erupted. Daniel quickened his pace, his fists clenching. "Maybe that's why your mom doesn't like you," another boy jeered. "You're disgusting." As he approached, Daniel saw Clara on the ground. Her backpack was tossed to the side, and her knees were scraped. 4 boys surrounded her, their grinning faces lit by the last light of the sun. One of them, a tall boy Daniel recognized as Sam, held a handful of Clara's hair. "Let me go!" Clara cried, her voice cracking with fear. "Oh, don't cry," Sam mocked, yanking harder. "Doesn't your big brother care about you? Or maybe he doesn't, just like your mom." Daniel's blood boiled. He dropped his backpack and stormed toward the group, his voice ringing out. "Get your hands off her!" The boys turned, startled. For a moment, silence hung in the air. Then Sam smirked, letting go of Clara's hair. Well, if it isn't Big Brother," Sam said, stepping forward. "What are you gonna do, huh? You're gonna cry. Or maybe get down on your knees like you always do at home." Daniel ignored him, his focus on Clara. "Get up, Clara. It's okay." But before she could move, one of the boys kicked her backpack across the ground. "Maybe she should stay down," he said, laughing. "She belongs there." Clara whimpered, her hands trembling as she tried to push herself up. Daniel snapped. He lunged at Sam, shoving him hard in the chest. "Back off," he shouted. Sam stumbled but regained his footing. His smirk grew wider. "You wanna fight, hero?" Before Daniel could respond, one of the other boys shoved Clara back onto the ground. Her cry of pain was the only sound Daniel heard. Everything else blurred. Daniel charged at Sam, his fists flying. He didn't care anymore, didn't think, didn't stop. Sam tried to block the first punch, but Daniel's rage was too fast, too strong. His knuckles met Sam's face with a sickening crunch, sending the taller boy staggering backward. One of the other boys grabbed Daniel's arm, but he shook him off, his fury unrelenting. He shoved Sam again, harder this time. Sam's foot caught on a rock, and he fell. His head hit the ground with a sharp, sickening crack. Everything stopped. The laughter, the jeers, it all vanished. The boys froze, their faces pale as they stared at Sam's motionless body. Daniel stood there, his chest heaving, his fists still clenched. He looked down at Sam, then at the others, who were backing away slowly, their eyes wide with fear. You killed him," one of them whispered, his voice trembling. Daniel's breath caught in his throat.
No.
It was an accident. Clara crawled toward him, grabbing his arm. "Daniel, we have to go," she whispered, her voice breaking.
Please.
The other boys took off running, their panicked shouts fading into the distance. Daniel stared at Sam's body, his stomach churning. The blood pooling beneath Sam's head glistened in the dim light.
Daniel.
Clara tugged at his arm, tears streaming down her face. "We have to leave." He nodded, his legs moving before his mind could catch up. Together, they ran, their footsteps pounding against the pavement. The house was quiet when they arrived. Victoria stood in the living room, her arms crossed and her face already set in a scowl. "Where have you two been?" she snapped. "Do you have any idea what time it is?" Daniel couldn't answer. His breath was still ragged, his heart pounding. Clara clung to his arm, her face buried against his sleeve. Victoria's eyes narrowed as she noticed their disheveled appearance. "What's going on?" she demanded. Clara spoke first, her voice shaking. "Mom, something bad happened." Victoria's scowl deepened. "What bad thing? What did he do this time?" Daniel opened his mouth, but the words wouldn't come. Images of Sam's lifeless body flashed in his mind, the crack of his head hitting the rock, the blood pooling beneath him. It wasn't Daniel's fault. Clara cried suddenly. Victoria's eyes snapped to her daughter. What do you mean? What happened? Clara hesitated, glancing at Daniel. Some boys, they were bullying me. They pulled my hair and called me names. Daniel, he tried to help.
And
Victoria pressed, her voice rising. Clara's lip trembled. One of them fell. He hit his head. Victoria's face paled. She turned to Daniel, her voice dangerously low. Is this true? Daniel nodded slowly. It was an accident. I didn't mean. Do you realize what you've done? Victoria hissed, cutting him off. If someone saw you, if those boys tell anyone, do you know what will happen to you? To this family. I was protecting Clara, Daniel said quietly, his voice shaking. Protecting her. Victoria spat. You've put her in danger. You've put all of us in danger. Clara flinched at her mother's words, tears spilling down her cheeks. Mom, please. Go to your room, Clara. Victoria snapped, her voice sharp and cold.
now.
Clara hesitated, glancing at Daniel one last time before running upstairs. Victoria turned back to Daniel, her eyes burning with anger. You've ruined everything, she said, her voice trembling. If anyone finds out about this, you'll be taken away, and don't think for a second that I'll defend you. Daniel's chest tightened. I didn't mean to. Save it, Victoria snapped. You've done enough. Go to your room and stay there. I don't want to see your face. As Daniel climbed the stairs, his legs felt heavy. Clara's sobs echoed faintly from her room, but he didn't stop. His own fear and guilt pressed down on him like a weight he couldn't carry. In the darkness of his room, he sat on the edge of his bed, his hands trembling. The image of Sam's body wouldn't leave his mind. From downstairs, he could hear Victoria on the phone, her voice sharp and urgent. We need to figure out what to do, she was saying. He's out of control, and now there's blood on his hands. Daniel's heart sank. He knew she wasn't talking about helping him. The storm wasn't coming. It was already here. The house was dark and silent when Daniel climbed the stairs to his room. Victoria's voice echoed faintly from downstairs as she spoke on the phone. Daniel couldn't hear the words, but he could guess what she was saying. He's out of control. He's dangerous. Daniel sat on the edge of his bed, his hands still trembling. His mind replayed the fight in vivid detail, the shouts, the punch, the way Sam's head hit the rock. That sound wouldn't leave him. He buried his face in his hands. What have I done? And then the fear hit him like a wave, stealing his breath. Sam wasn't just any boy. He was Sam Connors, the son of one of the wealthiest families in town. Daniel remembered hearing whispers at school about Sam's father, a man who held power, who was feared as much as respected. If you ever cross Mr. Connors, you'll regret it, someone had said once, almost in awe. Daniel's chest tightened. They'll come for me. The police. His father. Everyone. His life as he knew it was over. There was no way Sam would survive that fall. He'd seen the blood, heard the crack. And Sam's father would never let it go. He stood up suddenly, pacing the room, panic rising with every step. It was an accident, he muttered under his breath, trying to convince himself. I didn't mean to. But the truth didn't matter. It never did. Not for someone like him. The shadows in his room seemed to grow darker, stretching across the walls like fingers reaching for him. Daniel sat back on his bed, pulling his knees to his chest, his body trembling. From down the hall, he could hear Clara crying softly in her room. For a brief moment, he thought of running away, disappearing before they came for him. But where would he go? He had no one. Outside his window, the wind howled, rattling the glass. It sounded almost like a whisper. "They'll come for you, Daniel." And he knew it was only a matter of time. If you want to know how this story unfolds, don't forget to like, subscribe, and write continue in the comment section. Kindly tell us where you are watching us from, and stay tuned for more. All on African Tales by Rosa. If you want to know how this story unfolds, don't forget to like, subscribe, and write continue in the comment section. Kindly tell us where you are watching us from, and stay tuned for more. All on African Tales by Rosa.